One of the rebranding teams for the 2024 season, Alpha Tauri, has received a very strong upgrade for the 2024 season. And what other team than Red Bull can provide them with such a blessing? The Faenza-based squad is looking forward to being back in the midfield of the grid. But this upgrade seems to be much more important than we could have initially imagined. And with this in mind, could Alpha Tauri be threatening other teams more frequently for points finish? And if so, how is this going to affect Ricciardo's future with Red Bull, his final desired destination? If there is one thing that the 2023 season has left us to think about, it's the performance of Alpha Tauri in the closing stages of the campaign. The team was close to passing Williams for P7 in the last race in Abu Dhabi, and ever since the Red Bull-esque upgrades were mounted from Singapore onwards, the Italian squad has managed to pull off some amazing races, mostly translated through the Mexican GP, where Ricciardo finished P7, and in Brazil, where Tsunoda's pace was really quite astonishing. Furthermore, in Mexico, Tsunoda was running closely behind Piastri in P8, and his impatience cost the team an additional 4 points, which would have been more than enough to pass Williams and complete the championship in P7. But P8 is as great as it gets, considering where the team was located in the past season and that it was constantly rumoured to be sold, as the official offer of $800 million was originally declined, and Helmut Marko fired some serious warnings towards the B team of Red Bull that if they don't manage to pick up the pace, it would be only logical for Red Bull to think of a potential sale of the team. Luckily for Alpha Tauri, the new owner, Oliver Mintzlaff, is not thinking in this direction, and after renaming the team, he did say that Horner and Marko will have a bit less influence on how Alpha Tauri will operate in the future, even though the headquarters were moved to the UK and the Italian squad is borrowing parts left and right from Red Bull. Apart from the rear suspension, which has been the key to 2023's ending stage's success, there seems to be another part coming to Alpha Tauri that they're going to implement on their car in 2024, and it will very likely be competing in the midfield, and that is the front suspension. Red Bull and McLaren were the only two teams that started the 2022 regulations with a pull rod suspension, but considering how far behind McLaren was on pace, it was kind of abstract to guess that the performance would be merely related to this concept rather than the push rod that has been chosen by every other team out there. But once McLaren started to make all of those gains in performance after improving the rear part of the car, and once Red Bull went on a journey to win 21 out of the 22 races in the 2023 calendar, it became imminent that this is a design the other teams should not and will not ignore. Luckily for Alpha Tauri, they don't have to actually do that much in order to receive this part of the RB19, as it falls under the category that is not penalised if it's seen on the other competitors. Being the B team of Red Bull does have its pros and cons, and while Alpha Tauri has been largely on the con side with the performance and changing drivers left and right, the 2024 season has been predicted to be one like in 2021, where Alpha Tauri fought for podiums and finished 6th in the Constructors' Championship, only 13 points behind Alpine in P5. The pull rod suspension of the Alpha Tauri's 2024 car will have a slightly lower front centre of gravity and will be mounted on a significantly revised chassis, and in addition to being prepared with new attachments to house the new suspension layout as well as the related steering column, the body will have more of a keel shape in the lower front section, reminiscing about the RB19 yet again. Of course, Jody Eggington, the technical director of the team, has a lot to learn about these things because he has two great human beings right next to him, Adrian Newey and Pierre Wash. So the solution that he's about to take from the RB19 will provide more air to the underbody in the direction of the Venturi channels. The aerodynamics in the front part will have a more Red Bull-like adopted philosophy, also in the area of the front wing and the Venturi entrances, with the rest of the car having different touches like we've been used to seeing in the McLaren, Aston Martin and Williams. All of these upgrades upgrades are not going to come without any warning to the rest of the grid, and as we saw from Singapore onwards, it does seem like AlphaTauri knows what they are doing as they head towards a new chapter of their existence, being more and less dependent on Red Bull at the same time. Now, Alpine is one of the teams that definitely needs to worry about the upgrades that are coming to AlphaTauri, as Williams have already been warned in the ending stages of 2023. But is this something that can make the other F1 teams go ballistic? Of course, we all know that Haas serves as more or less the B team of Ferrari, and with Mercedes supplying engines, gearboxes and suspensions to teams like McLaren, Aston Martin and Williams, you can bet your money that they will be in a very nervous state when they see AlphaTauri fighting for points more regularly by borrowing a design from a car that shattered the dreams of every other competitor out there. It is indeed a bold strategy to use as many of the RB19 parts as possible in 2024, because whether you believe it or not, this might be the best approach that AlphaTauri could have for the upcoming season. Obviously, all of the other teams understood where the deficit lies, and while they can't do that much about it to narrow it down, the upgrades are going to come their way, and it will still be a much better version of what we've been used to seeing in 2023. Even Red Bull said that the 2024 version of their car, the RB20, will be about 60% evolved in terms of pace and performance, and this does make you wonder whether or not AlphaTauri will be competing up high with the new pull rod suspension mounted on the 2024's Challenger. Christian Horner understands the fears of the public that this is going to be yet another pink Mercedes saga, something that he personally spoke up about as he went on to say, "We're an awfully long way from a pink Mercedes. There are some transferable components that are clearly listed within the regulations that you're allowed to supply, and that's what they get. When you look at the car, there are quite fundamental differences between that car and a Red Bull racing car, and arguably there are other cars on the grid which are far closer in concept than an AlphaTauri is. You've only got to look at an Aston Martin or even a McLaren. If you look around the rear suspension of a McLaren, it's very close in concept to that of our own car. The performance of AlphaTauri is down to the quality of people that will be in the team. Of course, there are certain components that we can supply, as is the case with Mercedes and Ferrari, that supply current Grand Prix teams with gearboxes, suspension and simulation tools and wind tunnel. But working closely with the Milton Keynes factory of Red Bull in the UK, more precisely on the aerodynamic concept and testing on the car, there is certainly no doubt that AlphaTauri has what it takes in order to shake up the grid in the upcoming season. In Italy, there is the design office for the chassis and the car body, as well as the installation of the RBPT power unit for the production of composite materials, but the testing is done strictly in the UK. This only goes to provide a further challenge for the teams that are already struggling in order to keep up with Red Bull, as if they didn't have enough challenges up until this point. So be that as it may, the road that AlphaTauri has chosen is a rather interesting one, but it doesn't come without a further backup plan in their hands. Although they are borrowing parts from Red Bull, and the new CEO of the team, Peter Bayer, said directly in a statement they are moving closer towards how Red Bull operates, the owner of Red Bull, Oliver Mintzlaff, wants to see the Italian squad be more independent in terms of performance, pace and sponsorships. That's why the name change has been supported by two massive sponsorships from the USA, and with the team insisting that the Faenza facility will remain as it is, there might be signs that AlphaTauri will return to its glory midfield days, like in 2020 and 2021, when Gasly won races and scored podiums in a more frequent manner. The cards are now in the FIA's hands, as they would have an extremely tough time trying to figure out whether what AlphaTauri and Red Bull are doing is legal, and more importantly, can they do something to stop it? We can't help but mention the 2020s version of the pink Mercedes on the grid, a situation that, while being extremely different from what we've been talking about right now, is still having its touching points with what is currently going on between Red Bull and AlphaTauri. The FIA's technical office has already clarified several times that there's nothing that can be found in order to prove the direct cooperation between Red Bull and AlphaTauri, despite Toto Wolff's concerns about Tsunoda's excellent performance in Abu Dhabi. Avoiding leaks of data between top teams and satellite teams is definitely the ultimate goal of the FIA, but in times like this, it's up to them to prove that we are in the wrong and all of these assumptions have just gone down the drain. With this in mind, do you think that AlphaTauri has what it takes in order to compete up front? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.